Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 9 in the discourse Mimana Afar Yakov, in which is the 8th discourse in the great book Bishosh Egdimu 5672. And this class is going to be the first class in chapter 31 in the book. So it's the ninth part, the ninth class in the Maamor Mimana, but we are already 2 chapters in this particular. So this is the chapter 31 in the overall book. Okay, we just have to do the kitzer, the little summary of the last class. In chapter 30, we're doing the summary on chapter 30. So we were learning how there are 3 stages in the light. In chapter 30, he spoke mainly about the second stage and the third stage. The second stage is the revelation of the Sefirot as they come out from that one combination of all the Sefirot together when they're still completely immersed in the Or Ein Sof, in the infinite light before the Tzimtzum. Then they are in a state of essential oneness, as we learned. Then, and then they move to a state of, I forgot, no, actually in chapter 30, he also speaks about the first level, which is this level. And this is called Hamerumam Levadoi, the king, the Hamelech, the level of Malchus, as it is exalted alone, meaning not in relationship to the worlds. And then there is the revelation of the Kav, which is already a certain level of revelation of that 10 Sefirot as a come forth. The Sefirot, the attributes come forth in an expressed state, but they're still overwhelmed by their source. So therefore, they don't really have identity, individuality. So they're still utterly simple and therefore hard to tell apart. Yet you have already 10, which means there is already the concept that there is subtle of subtlest beginnings of something already. That's why he referred to it as Mitzias Nikeres. It's already an existence that is recognizable, although it's not yet a fixed and defined entity. And then finally you come to the last stage, which is the stage of when the lights go into the vessels. Then the vessels already define the lights become impacted by those vessels, and they become more solidified, more defined. And although they're not as in any way defined like the vessels, like another a very important point, which I did very quickly all the way in the end, and that's why I felt that I rushed through in the last class number 8, that he says over here, Makol Makam Adveikus Vayichud, since it's still a level of light, it is still in a state of complete oneness with God himself, on a level of he and his lights are one, or he and his life forces are one, as opposed to the oneness that Hashem unifies with the vessels, because the vessels are already more of a something, and it's a lesser degree of unity with Hashem. However, the last point we were learning in the class was, if you remember, that on this level, even not just the vessels, but the lights that are already enclosed in the vessels have become already enough of a something that they are really differentiated one from the other. And in order to have them integrate one with each other, and sometimes opposite, an energy, a force that is opposite of it, like kindness and severity are 2 opposites. In order for them to integrate and interloop with each other and intertwine and synchronize with each other, they need a higher revelation that shocks them out of their own existence, brings them to a higher level of bittul, of humility, of less being who they are, and that's how they unify with each other. As opposed to the level of the lights, when it's before it goes into the vessels, they naturally blend with each other. because they're not even separate. You can't even tell the difference between one and the other. So they're naturally comfortable with opposite energies. But in this level, they're not naturally that way. They need some superimposing, which he said in the end of the disc, in the end of the Maamor, at the end of the chapter. You need a level of antu de kasher line. You are the one who bonds them. That means even these lights, they're a specific light, and they're not you. You bond them, because when you flow into them, and so that impacts the lights to melt out of their own rigidity of self, and therefore combine with each other and combine with their source. They're not naturally one with the Or Ein Sof. There's like a superimposed unification which unifies them. Okay. Let's see the Kitzur. And if you want to understand all that we just spoke better, re-listen again to the last class number 8. Here we're going to the Kitzur. This is again the summary of last chapter, which we're learning now, before we start chapter 31. The first level, when the lights are still in their source, in the Or Ein Sof, before they ever left the Tzimtzum, pre-Tzimtzum. On that level, they are exalted alone. And that level he referred to earlier, Atik to Adam Kadmon. That level is called Atik. Atik meaning it's the higher, it corresponds. It's really much higher, as we discussed earlier in the discourse. It's much higher than the level of Keser and even of Pnimius HaKeser, which we usually refer to as Keser, the crown, and the innermost of the crown, called the Ancient of Days. This is before the Tzimtzum. But within the entire scope of existence, when you're looking at all of existence together, this level is called the innermost of the crown. Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days. Which level? The Esa Spheros, the 10 Spheros, when they are still Ganos, when they're still hidden in the Or Ein Sof, there is somewhat of a relationship already to creation, and that's why we have to say that it's Atik, it's not related. The mere fact that we have to negate the relationship, saying it's not a source, is implying that there is already reason to have some kind of a, and that's because it's the 10 spheres, as opposed to the Or Ein Sof prior to the Esa Spheres Agnuzes, prior to the Alos HaRatzon, before the will of creation, or the Hashara, or the estimation. Over there, you don't even have to say that it's Atik, and that's beyond being Atik. But in this level, you call it Atik. Atik of what? It's the Atik to the Adam Kadmon. So Adam Kadmon would be considered like a primordial man, would be considered already like Oros Pekelim, like lights and vessels. And this is the Atik, this is removed from that. So the highest parts of, the highest configuration, which is Adam Kadmon, this is the Keser of Adam Kadmon, not just the Keser, the Pnimius of the Keser, the innermost of the crown of Adam Kadmon. So Abadrega is in the second level. What's the second level? Second level is when the lights are already revealing themselves, not when they're lost and embedded in the Or Ein Sof, but when the lights are coming out. Over here, God is very elevated, but over here, his elevation is already in relationship to the world. You say he's elevated from them, unlike the first level where he's elevated for himself, which is implying a much more of a relationship with the world. And this is already considered a source. Because this is already after the Tzimtzum. You're already beginning to see the seeds of Esa Spheres. Although, as we're going to say in a moment, they're still very pashut, but still it's the seeds already of the Esa Spheres. And that for that reason, it's called P'chinas Arech. It's Keser. Because if you remember, Keser is comprised of 2 levels. Arech Anpin, the long face, and Atik Yom, the Ancient of Days. This is the lower level of Keser. When we say it's the lower level of Keser, we mean the Keser HaKloli. We're talking about the Keser on the most loftiest level. So in that most loftiest level, this is the lowest level of Keser, because even though all it is Or HaKav, it's before Adam Kadmon, but it's already a source for Adam Kadmon. And it's like the Keser of Atzilus, that's a source for Atzilus. It's above Atzilus, especially the lower level of Keser, which is called Erech Yomin. The very fact that we're calling it the long Arach Anpin, the long face, is implying that it is relative to a short face. So the short face is already the sphirot that are in the lights that are in vessels. This is still or Ein Sof. It's still in an infinite state, but it's already beginning to be sphirot in that sense. But notwithstanding the fact that it's already closer to creation, you can't really define it as Spheros and say it's locked and it's defined because it's Bechinas Belima. It's still without substance. It's not Spheros with substance, it's without substance. But today, God Gimel on the third level, and the third level are the lights that do become enclosed in vessels. Shanasim, they become ke'erech. They become ke'erech mohusa kelim. They become similar to the substance of the vessels. The vessels already do a job on it to make these lights already become more tangibly something. And this is the reason why. That if for whatever reason we do find that these lights that have already vested themselves in the vessels and become tainted by the vessels, when these lights switch vessels, when they wiggle themselves out of their definitions, they cannot do it on their own. They need a power higher than them, a tow truck. They need a tow to pick them up from their investment. Therefore, he says, to switch them from one to the other. And also for them to bond with pure infinite light that is not defined. And their integration into the Or Ein Sof, as they lift themselves up and become melted, so to speak, in the Or Ein Sof, subsumed in the Or Ein Sof. If they have already if the light is already defined, it can't do that on its own because its own definitions ground it and give it kind of a gravity that pulls it out away from the Or Ein Sof. I don't say gravity; it pulls it into himself. So, in order for them to act contrary to that, Huayde Or Elyon is through a greater light, Hameir Aleim, that shines upon them, Ubahem, and in them. And this is what inspires them to get out of themselves. But they do have a self. Because they're already vested in vessels. Okay. All of this is a conclusion of chapter 30. Now we start, meaning and the Kitzur. Now we start chapter 31. Now behold, Gimel Madregas Elu, these three levels, and Gimel Bechinos. These are three levels called Nekuda Kav Shetach. A point, a line, and a space. A point, a line, and a space. What does that mean? What do you say these three levels? This development of sphirot, of attributes, which go through the state where they're lost in the Or Ein Sof, completely lost, to the point that they're considered all one. There's not even 10. Excuse me. And then the state that they emerge outward, but they're still not in vessels. And then finally, the state that they go into vessels. These three stages in the light, or these three the light evolving from level to level, they're also referred to as point, line, and space. I guess this idea of Nekuda Kav Shetach, like where does this phrase come from? I mean, it's an element, I think, of obviously just of physics, or obviously, which is there's a point and then there is a line. When you draw something, you start with a point and you make a line, and then if you're drawing, you make a few lines together, creates a space inside of it. So Nekuda Kav Shetach. So I think it's a philosophical element. I don't know, like where does this come from? Is it discussed in Kabbalah? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll check in the other version of the Maamor, the more newer version. Maybe he gives a Mara Makayim to this. Does this state in Sefer Yetzirah? I don't think so. Is it from the books of philosophy, Rasag, or something like that? I don't know. We'll find out. But why am I looking for it? Because what he's basically saying is the reference that we know that there's such a thing called Nekuda Kav Shetach. Well, this applies to this evolution of light. So let's see what they are. The Nekuda means a point. So the point, to B'chinas Atzmios, is referring to the essence of the 10 spheros. They're still above, and it's the essence of something before the essence was drawn and before it was revealed. In our case, it would be the essence of the 10 spheres. But before they have any form of drawing out of the essence, every expression of something is going away from the essence into revelation. The revelation of something is already an exiting the essence. The essence is very private and very to itself and very undefinable. So when we're talking about Nakuda is referring to the essence of something. And Ukamaik is an example. Nakudas Yud, the point of a Yud, of the letter Yud. You make a decimal point. What do you have? You have no ispashtus, you have no expansion, not to the length and not to the width. There's just a point. There's nothing to measure, just a point, a dot. And you can imagine that dot being tiny, 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 almost like the tiniest possible. That's the essence of a Yud. So now, but you realize that every artist that's going to write any picture, that's going to make any drawing of anything, any type of sketch of a blueprint or whatever it is, everything. The first thing, the pen has to get to the paper and make a point. From the point, you start extending that point through lines. So for imayos sheyesh by vav da, and that's what it says. That's, for example, the letters are also that way. Any letter that you're writing, if you're writing letters in the Torah, the scribe, every letter begins with a point, with a dot. Then you're extending it. Now, in Hebrew, the letter Yud, which is a point, but the letter Yud contains within itself another two letters. How do you see that? Because even though in writing, when you put the dot, you don't see no vav dal, you only see a dot. But in Hebrew, the word Yud is spelled Yud, because every letter, even A, B, C. B, for example, is a B. But also, in order to write the B, if you wanted to spell it correctly, you would spell it B-E or B-E, B-E-E, two E's, whatever. You get B. So, and so is each letter. So letters have other letters inside of them. But in Hebrew, they're of major consequence. These are the real. So the Yud has got the Oisias Hamiloi, the hidden letters, which is the Vav and the Dalet, which basically tells you that whenever you have a Yud, a point, inside that point, there is more than the point. The point is a potential, which contained in it, it's all there within the original point. However, looking at the point, you don't see no Vav and you don't see no Dal. Now, what's the Vav? Think about it. The Vav is really taking the Yud and going down with it. Vav is a long Yud. So you can see how a Yud has a Vav. Because if you're going to stretch the point and draw the line further, it's going to give you the Vav. That's why when you spell the word Yud, you spell Yud Vav Dalet, because from the Yud, and what does that mean? That means that the Yud is, let's say, almost like pregnant with the Vav. The Vav, the potential of the Vav is inside the Yud. Then, what's a Dalet? A Dalet is of a Vav, but also a roof, which means you're extending the like in Hashem's name, you go Yud, there is Yud Hey, Yud K, but which Hey also has a Vav in it. But the idea of a Dalet is that you're going in two directions. So first in the Yud, you're going just, in the Vav, you're going just down, or a straight line. I mean, you're going on a vertical line. And in a Dalet, you also have a horizontal line. But it says, but when you're looking at the Yud, you only see the dot. And even when you see the letter Yud, you're not seeing the Vav Dalet. It's only when you're spelling it out. It's all hidden. And everything is in the level of a nekuda of a dat levad. And therefore, it means that it's, imagine the entire universe, the entire script of information that makes up all of existence as it is in that original dot. There's once a great tzaddik, the holy Reuven Rabbi Yisroel of Reuven, one of the greatest Hasidic masters. So I read once that he said about himself, now only the biggest tzaddikim who are so nullified to God, they have no self at all, can speak this way. Obviously, once you hear what he says, you'll see. It's amazing. So he said like this. He says the entire Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, are all really included in the book of Genesis. Because Genesis, the beginning, it really contains within itself all the information that is going to be in the later books. The later books are just elaborating. I mean, we don't see that. We look at the later books as new mitzvot and so on and so on, but it's really all there in the book of Bereshis. Then he said the book of Bereshis is really all concentrated and contained in the first Torah portion, the portion of Bereshis, which is the first Sedra of the book of, first Torah portion of the book of Bereshis. So again, the entire Torah is in the book of Genesis, and the book of Genesis is in the Torah portion called Genesis, Bereshis. Now the entire first Torah portion of Genesis, which is Bereshis, is included and concentrated in the verse of Bereshis. One verse, Bereshis bar Elokim eser shamayim v'es haaretz. Now, the entire first, you can imagine how potent that verse is. If it contains within itself the entire parsha of Bereshis, which the entire parsha contains within itself the entire book of Bereshis, which contains in itself the entire Torah. Wow, imagine what the voltage is in that one phrase. Then the entire verse is in the first word of Bereshis. Just the word Bereshis. The entire Torah is packed into it. And the entire word of Bereshis is contained in the first letter of Bereshis, which is that base. Be, just the be. Wow, everything is in that base. And then he said the entire base is really concentrated in the dot, in the middle of the base, because when you write base and you write it with a strong sound, not a v, but a b, you add a little dot. In that one nekuda, that one point of the dot, that's where the entire Torah is to be found, in that one dot. And then he said, in that dot, that is I. That is my soul. Basically, my soul is plugged in that level, where the entire Torah is still in that original dot. Imagine how potent that is, and what kind of wisdom or what kind of consciousness that is. To say that, he said about himself. So every word of Torah starts with a point. And the point, as he's saying over here, is still simple. It means you don't have design yet. So now let's go back. The entire universe is created from 10 sefirot, from the various different words that God spoke to create the world. And the words are reflecting God's emotions. When God spoke to create, he spoke what he was excited about. And the emotions are coming from God's intelligence, which are the 10 sefirot. So all of existence is just various different conversation of God, words of God, that are all stemming from the intellect and the emotions of God. Those intelligence and the emotions of those sefirot, till they become sefirot, they're watered down, weaker. But if you take and trace the sefirot higher and higher and higher, where are you going to find the sefirot? And the highest point, where they are all contained in the Or Ein Sof. In what? Oh, it's Or Ein Sof, it's infinite light. Yeah, but there's a point there. What's the point? The point is the source of the Or Pnimi, which is the 10 sefirot, Hagnuzos. But over there, it's just a point. There's no 10 there. There's no Chachma Bin Das. It's a potential whatever that means, for 10 spheres. So all those 10 are there, but they're there in an essential pshitostic state. That's the dot. What's the line? Vakav, and the line is already the next stage. That's already drawing forth and revelation. Rak, however, that, once there is a line, the line means coming down. The line that we're talking about over here is a vertical line, so it's going down, implying that something is revealing itself already. It's descending from its essence, and it's emerging outward. What is it happening when it's emerging outward? It's unpacking its potential. From being concealed, those potential, and in the case, since it's the potential for 10 Sefirot, that potential is beginning to, put out the output. 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. And it's actually 10 points. What is the line really made up of? It's all extending from the original point, but the entire line, although the points are coming out, now you can see a line already. You can see, which, as we're going to see in a moment, is 10 dots. That's what the line really is. It's 10 dots, but the fact that it's still a dot. What does that mean? It's still a dot, meaning you still have no definition there. It still has no shape and form, which means it's still pashut. It's still simple. But now you have to understand, if it's simple, so how is it 10? What differentiates one from the other? Okay, tricky. And that's what we were learning earlier. We still don't really have such a clear understanding. How can you say on the one hand that once the kav comes forth, you have 10 already? Metzias Nikeres, it's an existence that's recognizable, but still it's pashut. It's still simple. So I was playing around a little with the ideas. You see it and it disappeared. It is and it's not. It's so elusive. It obviously I'm grappling with something that is so undefinable because it's undefinable. So, but that's the point of it. When it goes into a state of a line, which is the state of the kav, which kav actually means a line, it's a drawing forth, it's revelation. What does it mean, that means when they are revealing themselves, these 10 spheres, they are revealing themselves still as they are in their source. So it's like when they're coming forth, it's their essence being revealed. It's not a watered down revelation. It is stepping forth from a state of essence private, from hidden, into a state of revelation. But when they're revealing themselves, it's as if it's revealing itself in the state when it was in the source. And since in the source it was pashut, simple, it's still pashut. It's still simple. V'hainu, as he explained, shakav, the line, even though it has details, be his galus in a revealed way, it's still simple. And in a state of oneness. Dehine. Okay. He's going to start explaining how does that work with this kav. And he's going to, okay, I don't want to go into this because it's going to, once we start learning further, this is going to completely, this is going to take a while. So let's leave it for the next class. We just kind of dabbled in the beginning of this idea of Nakud Kav Shetach. We will, Be'ezras Hashem, complete the idea or explore more in the next class. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.